Right. So now we're going to see, we're moving away from Teddy Roosevelt. We're going to see how Taft handled it. We're going to see how Wilson handles it, and we're going to move from there, okay? Now, going into this, millions for public construction, etc., we have the fact that William Howard Taft will abandon big stick diplomacy and will go to dollar diplomacy. In other words, we're going to give you money to run your infrastructure, things like that, if you help us out. And so that's what's going on here with this. And so Taft will actually substitute dollars for bullets. He'll make an economic thing. Here's another one to kind of go through this. U.S. businesses would invest in countries and convince them to be friendly to the United States. That's the idea of dollar diplomacy. And if you didn't like it, you wouldn't get any money, and so therefore you're going to fall by the wayside. So Taft is more or less a sheep of Teddy Roosevelt. He really didn't have any original ideas. He just kind of followed it through. Now, all that begins to change when Wilson becomes president. And Wilson believed in moral diplomacy. If you remember, I told you he had some Christian background, and he believed in spreading Christianity and ethical principles. In other words, if something is going wrong, he's going to try his best to fix it. Now, his main area of focus is going to be a country that is pretty close to us, and that is Mexico, correct? And so Wilson is very concerned about Mexico. It's right beneath us, and he figures, let's get this going. The problem is, Mexico cannot stay stable. They have a ton of revolts. Now, the big ones I really want to focus on here would be the ladders. First off, we start with Porfirio Diaz, and he's not really a big person, okay? He is a dictator. There's a revolt. They kick him out, and they put Francisco Madero in there, all right? Now, Francisco Madero, again, not much different. He is an American businessman, but he gets caught up in this bad thing, so guess what? They go and they find him and they kill him, and they put in Victoriano Huerta, who happens to be a military man. And here's where the problems begin to arise very, very quickly. There are two resulting school of thoughts, and the idea is to get rid of Huerta, but it is, who do we support? And so we have Venustiano Carranza, and then we have Francisco Villa. And so these two men are jockeying for position. Carranza is kind of a businessman, whereas Villa is more of a kind of just an agrarian farmer. And so with those names there, you just need to understand this is a series of revolts in Mexico. They are agrarian revolts, meaning the farmers, because if you've ever been to Mexico, that's what their economy is based off of. And so that's where we're moving going forward. Okay? Now, here's where it gets interesting. When Huerta is president, Tampico had some sailors go in. And these sailors went in, and they were treated pretty badly. Okay? And so they go in there with their show of force, and Huerta must salute, or the Atlantic Fleet will seize Tampico and Veracruz. So he has to basically salute the American flag, or we're going to go into this. And so again, this is very similar to the Spanish-American War. We don't like this, and so nonetheless it is there. Now, the American support is going to be thrown behind Venustiano Carranza, because we see Carranza as being a businessman and helping out American interests. And remember, that's what we're about, okay? Now, Pancho Villa did not like this very much. So Pancho Villa is going to try something to get the Americans to hate Carranza. And what looks worse than not controlling your own country, correct? So what Pancho Villa will do is he'll come across this border into Columbus, New Mexico. Right here. And he burns it to the ground. All of it. And the idea is to make it look like Carranza did this. Now the problem is, some people saw what was going on, and they found out it was Pancho Villa who actually did this. So Wilson is furious. He's not mad at Carranza. He wants Pancho Villa, and he wants him to be in charge of him. Okay? So the man he sends in after Pancho Villa is General John J. Pershing. His name was Blackjack. Now they named him Blackjack because in Blackjack the game there's a risk. You may go over, you may go under, etc. And so he liked taking risks. So General John J. Pershing will be sent in to capture Pancho Villa. However, they capture him in the United States, not with that, but on his own accord. Now, the lasting result here is there's been kind of some bad ties with the United States. Carranza still maybe doesn't trust us, and when World War I occurs, in a few years after this, the Germans try to make that deal with Mexico, known as the Zimmerman Telegraph, and we'll get into that later on. Now, just some lasting impressions here. We also at this time of Wilson, we will acquire the U.S. Virgin Islands, which is Antigua and Barbuda, San Juan, which would be in Puerto Rico. There's a couple other ones, all right? Now, some of these are by themselves, but nonetheless, it is another place that we do add. Okay? And lastly, the presidents that came after Wilson will begin to enact, and really strong under FDR, what is called the Good Neighbor Policy. And the idea was to strengthen our understanding of our southern neighbors in South America. And so we try to work with them rather than forcing them to take the money or not. And so that's actually a pretty good policy. Things have been really kind of quiet down in that neck of the woods. And so that's always a good thing if there's quiet. That does it for imperialism. The next thing we will talk about is World War I. And so buckle up for that one. I do also have some interesting videos I'm going to put as side assignments for World War I. I had the opportunity to go to the World War I Museum in Kansas City, and I'm going to have those as little assignments, and I'll tell you about that in class, what has to happen with that, all right?